Let me welcome all of you participants and our guest today, Mr. William Randolph, to the Asian American Chamber GovCon webinar series. Thank you so much for doing this. Our topic today is planning during a continuing resolution, the burning question of what is this continuing resolution, the shutdown, oh my God, how do we plan? And of course, the very popular Ask the CEO. You can ask him any questions related to anything, not just the continuing resolution. This is your chance, folks, to ask those questions of how do I talk to you guys? The most common question that I get, how do you reach these people? So again, I welcome our speaker today, Mr. William Randolph. He's the founder and CEO of Think Acquisition. I'm your host, Reena Bhatia. I am the CEO of ProposalHelper and BidExecs. I am also a board member at the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. I started to go through Mr. Randolph's bio and I said, how do I introduce him? It's a long, accomplished career. Mr. Randolph, first and foremost, thank you so much for your service to our nation. You are a veteran, so thank you. Mr. Randolph started his career in 1995 as a Navy contracting intern right out of college, out of West Virginia, of all places. And since then, as you can see, and I will let him give you a little bit of background about himself, but what an amazing and accomplished career and service across various different agencies and senior level positions. He retired in 2016, and I think that word retired should be changed to something else. He transitioned out of the federal government to start Think Acquisition in 2019, and I am a frequent guest of his on his webinars on LinkedIn. Or his videos on LinkedIn, if you have not watched them, you should follow him. Very entertaining, I must say, and I learn a lot too. So thank you for joining us today. A quick word about the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber really services all businesses across the DC metro area and now pretty much nationwide. It is very inexpensive to join the Chamber, so we encourage you all to support the Asian American Chamber by becoming a member. If you'd like to sponsor any of the webinars, you get to sit in this host seat and present a little bit about your company. So think about sponsoring the webinars. Our members receive webinar slides and recording first before everybody else. So you do get first dibs on all the inside information. So please consider joining the Chamber as a member. A quick disclaimer before I hand it over to Mr. Randolph. This webinar is for informational purposes only. None of the content is, nor shall be deemed to constitute legal opinions or legal advice. With that, I am going to let you, Mr. Randolph, share your screen, present today, and then I will collect questions. We are collecting questions. Q&A lines are open, and we'll answer those towards the end.
Thank you so very much, Reena. I really appreciate it. So folks, thank you again for the opportunity to come and talk to you. This is one of the very important aspects of our business from a government contractor perspective to understand and to maneuver, I'll use that word, and that is planning during a continuing resolution. And then I get to do one of the things that I love to do most is just to ask questions about being a contracting officer and my experiences there and how I can help you going forward in any fashion. So if you all are ready, let's take this journey. This is me, and as Reena mentioned, I started a company last year called Think Acquisition. These are symbols of the organizations that I've worked for, and most of the work that I do now is in the training and development space and a bit of consulting around the edges. Reena showed a little bit more earlier about who I am and what I've done. I always like to give people a sense of who's this guy, that why are you going to spend an hour listening to to me share my thoughts, opinions, and ideas on any given topic. So I just want to make sure we have a level setting of who's this guy and why am I willing to invest, because I truly mean that, invest an hour with him. The biggest takeaway that I'd like to do on this slide is just to say, I am thankful that in October of 2020, I arrived here. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to participate with you and be a part of your program. So one of the things I love talking about, and I have actually done more of it recently, this wasn't part of my business when I started in 2019, but talking about rethinking government contracting from a business, from a B2G perspective, rethinking what that looks like and how we participate and show up in the environment as government contractors. Most of the time, when you think about government contracting, you think about it from a procurement management perspective. At least from my vantage point, having spent 26 years in federal procurement, I understood the inner workings of the procurement organization and the procurement machinery. What I have learned is that machinery, as a government contractor now living on the other side of the table, the more I know about that machinery, the more I can unlock value, the more I can deliver value and meet requirements of government agencies to help them meet their mission. So the understanding the machinery of that, understanding the cogs and the gears in that machinery is of valuable importance. One of the things that you all wanted to talk about was planning during a continuing resolution. The budget as part of that machinery is a really important piece. It's really the engine of that machinery is the budget. This is a picture of the president's budget that was submitted for FY21. Obviously, we know there's not an appropriation, so therefore there's this thing called a continuing resolution. And what I'd like to talk to you about for the next few moments is how do we understand and maneuver in the space of a continuing resolution. First, I just want to make sure that we have a level setting. There are some complex rules associated with Congress and the budget. Primarily, there are two roles. Okay, the authorization role, that agencies are authorized to spend money. They are sanctioned to spend money. No dollars have been appropriated yet, but in the authorization process, it gives programs, agencies, and departments the legal authority to operate their programs. That's only one half of the equation. The second half of the equation is now then the appropriation. Once you have authorization that you become legal to be a program, to be an agency, to spend money, then comes the appropriation piece that shows up, is that here now are the funds to go and execute. That shows up as 12 appropriations annually. And those are required by law to happen by September 30th. And again, required by law. When that doesn't happen, you can see here's a graphical representation since 1977 of how many times all of the appropriations bills have actually been done, have been signed into law by October 1st. Okay, there were a few years prior to 2003, 2004. This is when DHS, Department of Homeland Security, was added into the mix, and they reshuffled then the appropriations bills. There were normally about 13. So from 1977 to 2000, 2003, there were only 4 times that all of the bills were actually signed on time, okay? So as a result of that, all of the other times, even when it now became 12 bills in 2006 and 7, you can see it's been since 1997 since we've had a bill, we've had appropriations law guidance, a budget in the books come October 1. As a result of that, there's this thing called a continuing resolution, also known as continuing appropriations, okay? It is, in legislative form, a resolution of Congress that says that in the new fiscal year, we have the opportunity, the government has the opportunity to spend money until the regular appropriations acts are enacted, okay? The specificity of that legislation shows up in two ways. It's for a specific amount of time, and it's for a specific rate of appropriation. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the continuing resolution is bound in two ways, in time and in rate. So, late in September, HR 8337 was introduced. And the Senate cleared that resolution through December the 11th, 2020. So that's the new number. That's the budget authority for FY21. We have budget authority. Remember, we talked about time, and now we'll also talk about rate. So the December the 11th of 2020 is the duration of the first CR, okay? That CR was passed by the House, 359 to 57, and passed by the Senate, 84 to 10. And was signed into law on October 1st by the president. Here are a few little fun facts. The longest overall period of time operating under a CR, 7 months, almost 7 months. There were 7 CRs in 2011. Okay, they kept biting little chunks of time off, but those little chunks of time, 7 of them ended up being almost 7 months we were operating under a CR. On average, since 2011, we've averaged about 5 months under CRs. And in a given fiscal year, about 3.7 CRs are passed, okay? And each one of those is about 37 days each. When we look at our CR through December the 11th of 2020, that's 72 days. So if you want to talk about the negative impacts of CRs to government agencies, here are the big 4. Okay, now these could be dissected into many others, but on a larger scale, these are the big 4 in terms of negative effects to government agencies. 1, you've got procurement inefficiencies. We all realize that one. You have delayed innovations. Okay, whatever innovations, whatever next is coming, next is delayed by innovations, because we'll talk about a thing about no new starts. Okay, there's a characteristic of the continuing resolution, that is no new starts. We have operational distractions, as well as constraints to managerial discretion in terms of at departments or agency levels, okay? That they can't do all the things they want to do because they're bound, for instance, in 2021, fiscal year 2021, they're bound by 72 days of spending authority. So here's the other side of the table. Here are the negative effects of the CR for contractors. They look kind of the same. Procurement inefficiencies on our side of the table, delayed innovations, the things we want to do, the value we want to unlock for the government, not able to do that for new starts. Instead of operational distractions, we have performance distractions, okay? Because those contracts, some contracts may need to be fully funded, and as a result of that, we'll have to do things to shorten the time based on our appropriations authority. And then there are the counterbalancing constraints to commercial and business direction as we respond to government requirements. So let's get down to what I think you really want to talk about. What government contractors can do. What can we do? Understanding this environment, understanding we've been in it before, here are some things that we can do. Number 1, Have an understanding of the process. Know what the continuing resolution, continuing appropriations language is. Okay, magic date, December the 11th, 2020. Okay, so have an understanding of what that is. And then two, have an appreciation for the compliance issues that are associated with that. Okay, when you think about 72 days of spending authority, make sure that whenever you're interacting with your contracting officers, or you're dealing with anyone in the government that's dealing around appropriations law and budget and spending and contracts, understand that there is a compliance piece that we have to be knowledgeable of as government contractors. Okay, here's the next chunk of what we can do. I call these the shuns. Okay, the 4 shuns. So number 3 is observation. We should be looking, we should be aware of what's happening in the environment, wherever demands may be coming from, what things are being slowed down, what things are actually being sped up, okay? Next, anticipation, okay? What do we think is coming? Let's use all of our resources of research and collaboration and communication to anticipate what the government is thinking about doing, but may not have the ability to start execution on. There's an anticipation piece that we as government contractors should be involved in. Number 5 is the preparation. Okay, now that we know, we observe, we see something over there, they can't start it, we want to lean into it and anticipate what is going to happen when we get a full year budget. We should be leaning into some of those things if they're quite mature. If you know that those requirements are real and they're just waiting on budget, we should be thinking about leaning into those as soon as we can. And then number 6 is probably the most important, is the acceleration. Okay, as soon as the budget becomes official, full year budget or additional CR, it's going to be off and running. It doesn't matter if we've spent 72 days spending in nickels and dimes. And one of my last jobs in government was to manage budget for Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, one of their largest programs. And we always say, we spent money like a pauper, and then we spend money like a prince. So there's nickels and dimes will come, and then the gobs of dollars will come when the floodgates are open and we have a full year budget. So acceleration will be required going forward once the budget is available and ready to go. So we should be prepared as government contractors. We should be preparing ourselves for that. A couple of additional facts. Remember, no new starts. That's the biggest limitation from a standpoint of starting a new requirement. Now, if the requirement I have seen, been a part of, and actually arm wrestled some lawyers about what a new start is when I was in government. The new start isn't necessarily a new contract, because that requirement has been there. We're just starting, that's something we've bought before, and we're contracting for it, or we're continuing to contract for it again. No new starts is really about the thing we haven't purchased before, or the requirement we haven't tried to satisfy before, and this is a new thing. We always want to make sure that we have congressional intent inside the government. The model is to always have congressional intent, to understand what Congress wants you to do with the money. If there's no budget in 21, we don't have congressional intent. What we have is continuing content, 72 days of it, from last year. But anything new, we don't have congressional intent because we don't have full appropriations budgets to provide that. So we always want to remember, no new starts. You can't spend money, but you can lean into the prep of spending money. This is the nuance. This is the gray area. Okay, there's a lot of government agencies that have that new thing that they can't start and they can't spend money on, but people are thinking about it already. Okay, the legwork, the spade work, the homework is being done. Okay, so while there isn't an opportunity to execute contract dollars and put dollars against a program, against a contract, against a strategy, there is opportunity to help lean into some of those activities in terms of the thinking and the homework, because when it becomes live, it's going to be a race to the finish line. One of the things you're also going to see is the subject to availability of funds clause showing up. This is leaning into it. So the government will say, look, let's get some things out there. Let's do some RFIs. Let's do some sources sought. This is a new thing. We can't spend any money, but it's all subject to the availability of funds. That's kind of the get out of jail free card that lets you lean into the activity, do some preliminary work without spending money, because it's subject to the availability of new funds. If the new funds don't show, that requirement dies on the vine. If the funds show, then we're ready to go and we're off and running. Funding also talks about, so this is the third arrow, funding is at a specified rate for a specified time, okay? So it is 72 days, here's the specified period of time, 72 days, and the rate is really simple second grade math, 72 over 365. Whatever that percentage is, 72 divided by 365, that's the amount of budget that agencies are being given. They're given it chunks at a time, and the first chunk is 72 365ths. Okay, that's how it's calculated. At least in my experiences, that's how it has been calculated. And then one thing that will really impact us, especially those of us government contractors that have existing contracts, CRs will absolutely result in more contract modification activity. Okay, if they have money that should have been applied, fully funded contracts for a year, and they only have 72 days worth, guess what? You're going to get 72 365ths of that money. Okay, and those contracts will mod after mod after mod. It will happen mod after mod after mod as you eat up the year. One of the things I always said when I was in government, that I don't think our legislative representatives understand the administrative burden associated with CRs, and that if they knew that and what it takes and what the added cost and added administrative burden of executing and administrating and doing administration on contracts during a CR period, they would second guess putting CRs in place and would put that time and energy into putting the actual appropriations and the budgets.
Mr. Randolph?
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because there are some repeat questions, and I think it's important we answer this for a better understanding as you move along.
Great, thank you.
The one question that is repeatedly being asked is, what do you define as new? What is considered new in terms of new work? And I think this is important we answer right now before you move forward.
Fair enough. It is any contracting action, any program requirement that the agency has not previously purchased. It's really simple. It's really simple. So if an organization has been in the business of hiring guard services, and for the past 5 years, they've had guard services, but now they need a new contract for guard services, that's not a new start. It's just a continuation. It just so happens it's a new contract, but the continuation of the requirement, that's not a new requirement. We can look backwards and see that that's been a requirement for years. It just so happens that we need a new contract for it. So
would it be fair to say that if there is an incumbent on the contract, that is not a new contract?
That is not a new start.
That would be one way to look at it.
That's a great observation. Yes, that's a really good cheat code or hack. If someone's doing it already, it's not new.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for that. So, as I mentioned before, we're all really, really good at this. Okay, as you can see, since 1977, there's only been four times that, so that's over 40 some years. There's been only 4 times, 43 years, there's only been 4 times that we've had all of the appropriations bill. So we as an organization, as an entity, as a community, the government, on the government side, as well as on the contractor side, we've been forced to be really, really good at this. So the last piece of advice that I will share is, okay, if you want the best planning advice, Semper Gumby, always flexible. Okay, the system will work itself out if we are in the game and willing to be flexible. Budgets happen, money flows. Okay, so we had one that said we had CRs for 7 months, but for those 7 months, money flowed for those 7 months. It limited CRs, it limited new starts. So that's why we talk about sometimes the negative impacts of the CR is delayed innovation, delayed growth, delayed mission accountability and execution. But in the end, it always works itself out. So the best thing we can do as government contractors is to have awareness, be compliant, do the pre-activities to help however we can, and then be flexible. Okay, so I am hopeful that that information gives you a little bit of context around what the CR is. I wanted to make sure we had a level set, what the CR is, why they show up, and when they show up, what do we do? What do we do? So I am now offering to talk more about either continuing resolution activities or to do the full open mic and ask the CO on any topic in the space. As I mentioned to you earlier, 26 years of experience on the government side of the house, now in my 2nd year of experience on the government contractor side of the house. And it is my honor to help and share however I can.
Thank you so much for that. We have a ton of questions here that I'm going to throw out at you and get some answers.
Sounds great.
I love the energy, by the way. I absolutely enjoy that. There are some repeat questions here, and so I'll group them together.
Okay.
Related to GSA, is GSA subject to continuing resolution, and are task orders on GSA impacted by continuing resolution?
So GSA, yes, is impacted by the CR. GSA corporately. Their vehicles, a vehicle is just the conduit for government contracted work. So if the work is new and you're using a schedule to buy it, it's impacted. Okay, so it's not the vehicle, it's not the organization, and it's not the vehicle that does the test of new start. It is the requirement. So if that organization has never bought that thing before or have that requirement before, and they're going to use existing GSA schedules to purchase it, it's not the vehicle, it's the requirement. If the requirement is new, passes the new test, or doesn't pass the new test, it doesn't pass the existing test and therefore is new, then that is impacted.
So I think that also answers some other questions we had outside of GSA, where they asked, are new task orders on multi-year IDIQs, are they considered new starts? Again, same rule, I presume, applies.
Same rule applies. It could be an existing IDIQ, BPA, BOA, but if the requirement, probably not BOA, but BPA, if the requirement is new, if you're writing if you have a overarching IDIQ that does IT services, okay? So broadly, IT services aren't new. But if you're starting a new requirement and writing a task for this new requirement under a larger IDIQ, that task cannot pass the existing requirement test.
Okay. Your next question, what does it take for the government to update their agency forecasts during acceleration?
During acceleration. So agency forecasts are really a responsibility of the contracting organization, the program office and the contracting organization to update. In my experiences, especially with Navy, Marine Corps, and Department of Homeland Security, that responsibility rests solely, shared with the program office and the contracting office. To update those, they should just be updating those. Now, the thing that will often change is I don't see much changing in the forecast except for when contract awards are slated, especially if the contract awards were slated for first quarter. I can promise you, if there were new start contract awards in the forecast that were slated to be awarded by December 31st of 2020, I can fairly guarantee you with high degrees of confidence, those will slip. So it will be just a matter of, one, we should know that going in as government contractors, knowing that if the CR is through December the 11th, it's a low likelihood of success that something will, if we had a budget on December 12th, that something would be awarded in the first quarter. Therefore, we should be thinking about that and says, this is likely something, if it was going to land in the first quarter, it will likely shift to the second quarter.
Would that be true with RFPs also, anticipating when the RFPs are going to be released?
So depending on the agency, some are very forward-leaning in the use of subject to the availability of funds clauses. Okay, so all you have to do is, if someone wanted to put something out there, they aren't spending money yet, and they believe that the budget was imminent, put the subject to availability of funds clause in the contract and keep it moving. The challenge is you don't know if this one CR will be like the example that I shared in the deck, that 7 CRs later, you're still under CRs, and in 7 months later, you can't award anything. I've actually seen in my career that things were started, we did everything up to the subject to availability of funds clause, used the subject to availability of funds clause strategy, ran the solicitation all the way, did all the work up to a contract award, and had to pause until we had an appropriation. I've seen it happen. And then as soon as the budget, so we've done all the work leaning in, which haven't spent a dime. We just go through the machinery of the process to solicit, to receive offers, to evaluate offers, and to have an apparent successful offer pending subject to the availability of funds. When the funds show up, everything's lined up, ready to go, and making it happen, and can make an award when you have money.
So now that you have come to the dark side from the government, it's interesting how you say we haven't spent a dime, but I hope you realize how much contractors
absolutely
spend and the amount of money it takes for a contractor to pull the proposal together. And I think that's one of the big complaints that contractors have is government doesn't realize that proposals are an expensive process.
Absolutely. So Rena, you are so true. That's such a true statement. So true that I've actually created a course for the federal government that talks about the 10 things I wish I knew about government procurement before I left government. And one of them is that the price of proposal generation and just the capture process itself, I had no idea. Again, spent 26 years in federal procurement, at least 10 of those at the senior executive level, and I didn't have a full appreciation of what the capture and shaping process is on the government contractor side of the house. And one of the things I talk about is the government often asks for key personnel. I don't think the government has a full understanding, at least I didn't, the risk and the ask that you're actually asking someone to sign a letter of commitment, to hold that person in abeyance in some fashion, to have some form of contract with that individual through an evaluation and selection process that may take months. Okay, there's no such thing as a bench. Okay, and therefore, when that person, when you finally get a contract award, if that person is still available, you might not want them, because the forces, you know, of others going after them and having work and new opportunities, anyone worth their salt is not waiting around 4 months for a contract award. You know, so
my God, you know, if you were in person, you would be getting standing applause right now from a contractor.
Yeah, it's real. I get it. But again, it took me, and I'm not going to say the dark side, just the other side. It took me going to the other side to have a full appreciation of that, as well as, you know, a host of other activities that the government is just on some level not aware of. I think private industry does a great job and spends a lot of resources, time, money, and human capital learning how water flows on the government side of the house. I am not sure that the government is investing the same amount of resources to understand how water flows on the contractor side of the house.
Well, and I'm hoping that your course gets really picked up, because we need that.
Yeah.
So our next question, talking about shaping requirements. One of the questions that has come in is, how can I shape or prepare for my next 2 quarters for a program that I am running? For instance, I was told to submit a CR request asking for a certain amount of money to cover Q1 and Q2. What does that look like, and how can I be successful in my ask?
Okay, so shaping from that standpoint, I've been on the receiving end of the CR request in government, and the best way to do that is to be, you know, to use the same math that the government that the government uses. For instance, if the math is 72 days of 365, then whatever you present should be in that fashion. Okay, and that is the base ask. And then the optional asks are based on either monthly or quarterly or whatever the next sequencings of asks. When someone said, so they said first and second quarter. So the first request would be for the 72 days. If there's anything left after the first quarter, which is 19 days, okay, so that has to be separate, because again, the CR is a function of time and rate. So if you want to be effective, you have to align to the time and rate. The first tranche of the request should mirror exactly what the CR request is, and then any other activity or any other time periods should be based on what the government is asking for. I would do the bare minimums, okay? This isn't a get healthy time. Get healthy time will come, okay? But this isn't get healthy time. This is keep the patient alive time, okay? So do what's necessary to keep the patient alive, keep the contract operational, I always say, the eye on the stove. You want the eye on the stove to be on simmer. So when it's time to go to high, we're ready to go. But keep that eye on simmer. So do the things that are necessary to keep that eye on simmer. It takes a little time. It will be painful, okay, because it won't be the full complement of resources necessary to run at 100%. But maybe you're running at 72. Okay, but if you can run at 72 and be ready to go to 100 whenever it's time, I think that would be the best strategy to do the ask. Follow the CR guidance, and then be very clear and be bare bones minimum of what's necessary to keep those contracts alive for the duration of the CR period.
Very good. Okay, our next question, a little bit of a different angle. What impact do CRs have on agency grants and BAAs, the broad agency announcements?
So in my opinion and in my experience, they even have more effect on grants and BAAs because most of that activity is actually new activity. We don't do a lot of grants that are 5-year grants, and we've done the same grant 10 years ago. The new grant is often based, a grant now is often based on a new grant requirement, okay? So it's almost in the DNA of a grant is that it has newness into it. It's a recent arrival. Therefore, the government will have a harder, not saying it's impossible, but they'll have a harder time with the negotiations. And I'll tell you, in government, you have more negotiations with your CFO and your lawyer than you ever do with your government contractors. Inside government, they're doing three-way arm wrestles right now. Programs want to do everything. The CFO wants to do nothing because they want to keep every dime, because they're not only responsible for getting the 72 days, but they want to take the tax off that to carry all the overhead things, all the overhead efforts that are part of running an agency that aren't directly funded in an appropriation. When you think about contracts, the line of business of acquisition, except for GSA. GSA is the only contracting organization that has direct funding. All of the other ones, depending on where they are a tax, a mission support tax on the programs. So the program is getting 72 days of money, and the first thing the CFO says is, give me the tax for your services. You can imagine the dynamic of, so it's not really even 72, it's not even really 72 days worth of dollars there. Again, having run budget for ICE in one of their largest programs, I remember those three-way arm wrestles, and then the lawyers just saying, here are the rules. And everything is just, they take a temperature check against, here are the CR rules. So those three-way arm wrestles are very interesting events. So please, that's why I say, bring understanding. As government contractors, we need the very first thing that was on the list was bring understanding that this causes some very interesting dynamics and behaviors to occur. Again, we've gotten really good at it, but it is still an interesting dynamic, and it causes some interesting behaviors to manifest.
So grants don't stand a chance during a CO.
The test for New Start is the test for existing requirements is just harder by the very nature of a grant and a BAA. We don't do BAAs for things that existed 5 years ago.
So here's a burning question that everybody wants to know. The frequent no answering of phones, no response to my emails. I can't get a meeting with the CO because they think I might get an unfair advantage. How do we educate the contracting departments or contracting officers that we are merely trying to demonstrate our capability and talk to them? We're not trying to get an unfair advantage.
Yeah, so this goes back to the awareness of the concept of capture. First, there's no awareness of the concept of capture inside government. That's a broad stroke. There may be some, but most have little awareness. So I'll give you a little inside baseball from a standpoint of a contracting officer perspective. The role of the contracting officer is to reduce risk of the system. Period. Period. That's the goal of the contracting officer, is to effectively buy in the most risk-reduced environment as possible. Now, the perception is an effective turn of the acquisition crank, if we have followed the rules, followed the guidelines, and reduced the risk, then the outcome is a good outcome, because the system, the turn of the crank, was a good outcome. One of the ways contracting officers reduce risk is to limit communication. It's sad, but it's true. And especially when there's a deal on the street, it shields up then. I think the pendulum is swinging to where contracting officers are feeling more comfortable having conversations and then manage conversations in the midst of procurements. I think the pendulum is swinging, but there are some out there that are still think it shields up, that somehow if I say something or I misspeak, that then it torpedoes, it could potentially torpedo the deal. And again, If the goal is to have a risk-reduced turn of the crank, then the contract also doesn't want to do anything to jeopardize that effective turn and the effective outcome of the contracting machinery. So now let's get to how you communicate. One of the ways, one of the strategies that I've done is I call it find my tribe. There are people, there are government contractors, there are government officials, program personnel that buy and live in the environment that you sell in. We need to go find them when there isn't a requirement on the street. They are somewhere. They reside somewhere. It could be LinkedIn. I know my tribe is on LinkedIn. So I constantly talk to my tribe all the time on LinkedIn so that when there's a requirement that now presents itself, I am top of mind. Okay? That they have a sense of, ooh, I know that guy. I saw this video. You know, so when a training requirement comes on, it's like, ooh, did you see that video? That I want to talk to that guy. It's like, mission accomplished. Because as soon as the requirement hits the street, it might be shields up, and I won't have an opportunity to have an engaged conversation. Industry days are getting easier. So while I know pandemic response has shut down a lot of things, actually access to people has actually been enhanced. Okay, so there are going to be a lot more online activities, a lot more online conferences and seminars, webinars. There's a place where your people congregate. I would say go find that tribe and go live in the tent with them. Okay, be amongst them, hear their pains, their goals, and their desires and aspirations. The reverse of that is you build content that your tribe finds you. So you put constant drumbeat of content out there so that you become top of mind when they have a need.
You know, I think you said the right thing. I've been attending a lot of industry days, and you know, yes, the pandemic has brought us all virtual, but it has opened up a lot of communication, and I must commend the government in what they're doing. They are opening up, and so if you're not attending your agency industry days or opportunity industry days, you're missing out. You really should be attending those because they are sharing a lot of information and they are more communicative.
More communicative, yes.
Okay, so again, the questions keep pouring in. I hope you have a little bit of time here.
I love it.
If you can, and if you want to post your contact information, because several requests for your contact information on here. So I don't know if you have your email and phone number you'd like to share for people to reach out to you.
Absolutely. Actually, I have it in the deck. So let me advance a little bit and then we can continue, but I'll just get to that slide. I just want to
those are all his videos, guys. Go watch them.
This is one of the things that I share with you about finding my tribe. One way is to find my tribe, and another way is for my tribe to find me. One of the ways for my tribe to find me is something that I created in the first weeks of the pandemic lockdown. We're now on week 33. So every week I go online with small form content to talk about something in the space: acquisition, program management, government contracting, leadership development. And what it does is it gives people a constant drumbeat of, this guy might know what he's talking about. Or they see something here that goes, it's a strategy that I use and I work with my clients called free to feed. That you start with something free content, you land, you become competent in their heads. It's like, this guy may know what he's talking about. And you give the free thing for 10 minutes. Then the ask come, hey, that was a great 10 minutes. Could you do that for an hour? Of course I could. And then the hour turns into a half day. The half day turns into a full day. The full day turns into the week. And then just right before the end of the fiscal year, I signed my first full year contract for a training, 12-month, full-year contract. And that engagement and that relationship started with a free YouTube video.
But I have to tell you, even the 10 minutes are packed with information. So,
thank you.
I mean, again, I can't say enough of that. But let me get to our questions here.
Okay.
while you're pulling up your contact information. So the question here is, do RFPs from DoD, DHS, or space agencies, including Pentagon, get affected with the CR? Are they affected by the CR? Can we continue to bid and adjust price basis? The question I think meant, can we adjust the price based on appropriations later?
So yes, they are affected. The entirety of government is affected. Okay, in terms of a CR perspective. Here's what happens inside of agencies. They get, for instance, an organization gets 72 days worth of their annual appropriation. What happens is their priority projects get funded. The lesser priority projects might not get 72 days worth. They may only get 50 days worth, or they may only get 30 days worth, or they may only get 0 days worth. It is the discretion of the agency, once the 72 days worth of money, once that pot of money shows up, to then do what the organization needs to happen. Here's one of the things that I'm sure is happening in organizations. Pandemic response and PPE purchases are getting more than their lion's share of the CR money, okay? Because we just can't stop doing those activities. And that drumbeat of activity needs to happen. So there's likely some programs that are taking it on the chin. But yes, the CR applies across the entire federal government spectrum. Some may get priority and may get more than their lion's share of 72 days worth of funding, but they're all affected.
But you can't adjust your pricing after?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you can't.
All right, burning question. Can you go a little bit deeper into prep to spend money? How does the contracting community know about it, that the agency is getting ready, prepping to spend money? How can the industry prepare for that and know about it?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the sources sought, subject to availability of funds, the RFIs, subject to availability of funds, the forecast that may be updated, subject to the availability of funds. All of those are blinking neon signs that, ooh, at some point, the floodgates are going to open, and those activities, those requirements, those contracts will be ready. I can either wait until we get a full budget and the sign says we're open for business, or I can think about it and lean into some of those activities, you know, at a low burn, at a low cost, to think about those activities, so that when the we're open for business sign is turned on, you're ready to go. So it's really doing good research. It's really working your relationships, okay? Because, you know, you would think about first quarter, not a lot of contract actions are happening in the first quarter. The first quarter is the time to work your relationships.
I think that's the important thing. Work your relationships. Don't sit behind your desks.
Yes.
The next question here, if there is no FY budget, does a 72-day clock start over?
It doesn't start necessarily at a 72-day. As I mentioned, there was one of my slides that said, I think it was 2011, we had 7 consecutive CRs. All of them were owed at different amounts of time. So it could be, you know, so the next CR could actually get us to January. So that would be a 20-day CR to get us to January 1. Okay. And then it could be a quarter CR from there. So a 90-day CR to get us to March, to the end of March. So the CR has the timing is actually a negotiated amount of time that happens up at Congress. The concept was by December, whatever's happening in the election will have happened. And then we'll have enough time after November 3rd to then for Congress to come back in session to get the bills put in place. But
okay,
it's not 72 days. That's not a rule. It could be 1 day. I've seen 5-day CRs. I've seen 12-day CRs. I've seen 30-day CRs.
All right. I know we are running out of time here, and I want to be respectful of that, but we have two questions, two last
Okay,
questions.
sounds
And
good.
I might just lie because I might ask the third one, but I'll ask it anyways.
Okay.
We have a caller who's talking about minority serving institutions,
Yes.
MSIs, and nonprofits. He said they're not small businesses. During the CR, how do MSIs respond to RFIs, RFQs if they have a qualified team to perform the work? Is there any difference in how they
There's no
respond?
difference. There's no difference
Okay.
because the requirements are coming from the agencies.
How does the CR impact OTAs?
No different. Okay, especially if an OTA. So clearly, an OTA is for a prototype. So let's pull the thread. OTA, Other Transactions Authority, is designed to award contract or a contract vehicle designed to leverage industry participation in new things, in prototypes. The inherent nature of an OTA says that that's a new start.
Right. Okay, well, I did lie, apparently. I can't stop. Okay. But I do want to help these people, and you're being great. So if you can be gracious with a few extra minutes.
Yeah, sure.
There's a question here that says the person retired from federal government and received a recommendation from their manager. If they include this letter in their solicitation now that they're retired, would that help, or does it not make any difference in evaluation, including that letter of recommendation?
Yeah, unless it's a, my first answer is no, it's not going to help. The only way it could possibly help is that if it's truly a subject matter expert, so you're looking at a scientist, someone with truly technical capability, and you're hiring that person, okay, for that skill set, almost like a personal services contract. That would be the only way where the attributes of the individual are actually that would help bolster the argument that this individual could do the work. Outside of that, when we bid on work, we are bidding jobs, categories, and job descriptions. We don't tend to bid people, subject to the, notwithstanding the key personnel's clause. Outside of that, we're hiring people to fit positions. We don't hire people.
So no brownie points there from a letter from the manager, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, our truly last question, and I think we'll wrap up with this, is can CR exist during an election?
Oh, absolutely. It's like the best reason for it to show up. It's because people are focused, everybody's focused on something else other than the operations, the effective operations of the government. Okay, they're focused on who's going to lead, and everybody's energy. It's kind of hard to get it's been hard to get people's attention for probably the last 90 days. Okay, even though, so post-pandemic was for a while, we had pandemic response, and it was like you could get everybody's attention if you had a bat with PPE on it and you swing the PPE bat, you could get people's attention. Okay, now after there was some level of catching up, to the demand, then the election season came. It's like you can't get people's attention now. Attention will come back after November, but then only for a short while, because then you'll have the holiday season and people will be in holiday season mode. So I'm posturing myself for January. It's like I'm doing all the spade work now, where it's hard to get people's attention. I'm doing my homework now. I'm building my relationships. I am leveraging my tribe. I'm growing my tribe. I'm being resourceful in beta.sam and looking and see who's buying what when, mining FPDS and G data. I'm doing all that activity now while attention is low, because come January 2nd, it'll be a mad dash. We'll have 3 quarters to go. And it's like, okay, we got to do 4 quarters worth of activity in 3 quarters. So it'll be time. So do your homework, do your prep, build your tribe, build your relationships, do your homework, do your research to be ready to go in January.
And you have Mr. Randolph's contact information on screen right now. So thank you so much for an amazing, amazing
My pleasure.
talk. It was great having you. The questions haven't stopped, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So please reach out to Mr. Randolph directly. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you to all the participants. It's been great.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you so much for the invite. And again, to your community, thank you for inviting me in and being so welcoming. And however I can help, reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I live. That's where my tribe is. And if I can ever help in any environment on the GovCon side of the house, I'd be honored to serve.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all.
All the best.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the contracting committee members for their dedication and support to make AACC Government Contracting webinar series possible.